Thanks, Cory. Well, he's been called the tech wonder kid whose manufacturing genius built Intel into one of the most powerful companies in the world. Joining us today on Bloomberg West is Craig Barrett, legendary Intel veteran and education advocate. Craig spent 35 years at Intel, becoming CEO in 1998. After Paul Otellini took over as CEO in 2005, Barrett served as Intel's chairman until 2009. Great to have you today, Craig.
My pleasure.
On Bloomberg West. So first of all, big news in the chip sector. Texas Instruments buying National Semiconductor. With the industry maturing, production costs going up, is more consolidation like this expected?
I think you've been seeing consolidation over the last decade or so, and you have two companies in the analog business. TI is obviously much bigger than National, but that sort of consolidation is to be expected.
There's more and more chip manufacturing moving abroad to Taiwan, Asia. Intel's now building its first chip plant in China. Is that a trend you think that can be reversed, or is the U.S., has it lost its competitiveness?
Well, the U.S. has to do a couple things to keep manufacturing here. One is the corporate income tax rate in the U.S. is a real disincentive. We have essentially the highest corporate tax rate in the world, and a big capital-intensive facility. You would like to have incentives to build it, not disincentives.
Craig, Cory Johnson out here in the newsroom. On the topic of National Semi and Texas Instruments, is there something about the analog sector that leads itself towards acquisitions, and might this be the time when we're going to see more?
Well, that's an area that has a huge number of line items or separate devices, tens of thousands for TI, I believe. So consolidation there seems to make sense. It's older production. It's a sort of thing where bigger is better. But if you look around the business as a whole, the big companies seem to be those that are doing successful in their business. Samsung, the Intels, TSMC. Bigger is better in the semi industry.
So when you were at Intel and looking at acquisitions or trying to decide about these things, what was the factor? Was price always the factor? Was it about getting at a certain market, or is it just about getting bigger in the right kinds of markets?
Well, it would be about synergy that you can get by combining two companies. Can you combine the R&D expense, the sales expense, the manufacturing expense? I think in the case of TI and National, there's great synergy, and that probably makes sense as long as the price is okay.
Also news today that Google's facing a big antitrust suit. Microsoft and Intel were also the targets of these kinds of investigations. Why do you think big, successful American companies are the targets of these kind of attacks, if you will? And do you think that regulators should back off?
Well, I think it always depends on the specific case. But big, successful high-tech companies get a very strong position in the marketplace. And the federal government kind of looks askance at big, successful positions in the marketplace.
And as the CEO and chairman of a big public company, how much of your time was spent kind of dealing with these legal issues? I mean, was it a distraction for you?
Well, I think every CEO of a successful company has a distraction. And by the way, it's a little more complicated than just the U.S. The U.S. antitrust tries to protect the consumer. European antitrust protects the competitor. So you have to be especially careful when you cross the Atlantic Ocean.
And European regulators are notably more strict, which is interesting why the U.S. regulators are getting involved potentially in Google today. Craig, since running Intel, he's been an outspoken advocate for education and how technology can improve the U.S. education system. He's also said he'd like to see more technology development overseas and is even dedicating time to chair the Irish Technology Leadership Group. So, Craig, I want to start with immigration. There was an op-ed by Sequoia's Mike Moritz in the Wall Street Journal today. He said, quote, "Here in Silicon Valley, immigrants and first-generation Americans provide the drive and hunger for almost every company worth its salt. But these days, protectionism and xenophobia are choking off the supply of H-1B visas for the best and brightest foreigners." Conservatives have obviously pushed to limit immigration in this country. Is that good for technology?
Well, I don't think it's just a conservative issue. I mean, the conservatives and liberals have different immigration policies and priorities, and they kind of hamstring each other, neither giving in. The real problem with high-tech immigration is that if you look at our graduate schools today, about 60% of the graduate students in engineering are foreign nationals. We educate them at U.S. taxpayer expense. They get their degrees, and then we tell them to go home. It has to be about the dumbest policy the U.S. government can have. We ought to make a happy home here for foreign immigrants who get advanced degrees in our universities at taxpayer expense. They ought to be allowed to stay.
You're also the chair of the ITLG, the Irish Technology Leadership Group, focused on building a bridge between the Irish tech sector and Silicon Valley. And at Intel, you spent, billions of dollars building your business in Ireland, hiring more people there. Can't we just bring workers there rather than bring them here?
Well, the ITLG group is really involved in entrepreneurs, Irish entrepreneurs, in trying to open up the U.S. market for them. It's really a group of Irish executives spread around the world who then look at startup businesses, business plans in Ireland, connect them with venture capitalists, connect them with the marketplace. Ireland's marketplace isn't big enough to support entrepreneurs. They need a big market like the U.S. market. So ITLG is really involved in taking the best and brightest Irish startups, getting them venture capital money, exposing them to the U.S. market, U.S. companies.
Craig, can you talk about some of the problems that companies have when they have cash that they've made in places like Ireland, places overseas, and are unable to repatriate it without fear of a tax burden? What problems does that create for an executive for a big company?
Well, it's not really a problem for the executive. They do things in the best interest of their shareholders. If you generate cash overseas, you probably will invest that cash overseas rather than pay the penalty to repatriate it back to the U.S. So having facilities in Malaysia or Ireland or China, an executive is going to say, let's continue to reinvest in those countries. The
U.S. keep you from doing things like, I'm sorry, does it keep you from doing things like dividends or finding other ways, even buying back shares, finding other ways to return it to shareholders?
Well, anytime you bring that money back to the U.S., you're going to pay the 35% U.S. corporate tax rate on it. And that's not in the best interest of your shareholders.
To foster more spending, would you give up the research and development credit for a lower corporate tax rate?
I think you want both. You want incentives to invest in the United States, and a high corporate tax rate is not an incentive to invest. I've seen all the information about GE in the papers, in the news the last week or two about not paying corporate tax rates. Companies like Intel and Cisco pay big corporate taxes. So a high corporate tax rate is a disincentive to invest here. You also want to invest in research. And you get R&D tax credits around the world, and the U.S. R&D tax credit is not the most competitive in the world either. How about some incentives to invest in the United States rather than disincentives?
Moving on to the education system, you've been an outspoken critic of the American education system. In terms of improving education, what is the single most important thing that the White House can do to make sure that there is top talent filtering into the technology sector?
First of all, I'm a critic about K-12 education, not the university education. We still have the best universities in the world. The best thing you can do is to combination of great teachers in the classroom and raising the expectations. Unfortunately, we don't have the world's best teachers in our K-12 system, and we have some of the lowest expectations of our kids in K-12 around the world. But those are the critical things you have to do.
And what is the role that technology can play in the education system?
Technology can help in delivery. It can make education much more exciting and interesting for students. And one of the things that Intel's done in its past is trained about 8 million teachers around the world on how to integrate technology in the classroom. It doesn't replace a teacher. You still need a great teacher because the technology is just a tool. But give the teachers tools, get great teachers, you get great results.
Craig, just to be clear, do you think the teachers union is an impediment to making better teachers in schools, getting better and newer teachers in schools?
Well, I don't think it's just the teachers unions. If you really wanted competition at K through 12, you had open charter school laws in every state in the United States. And today there are only about 4 states that really have open charter systems. You don't have to have certified teachers. You don't have to have unions. You don't have to follow the curriculum that the public sector follows. If we really wanted competition at K through 12 like we have at the university level, we'd have more open charter laws like the state of Arizona. Arizona has the most open charter system in the U.S.
Craig Barrett, Intel veteran, chairman of the ITLG group. I'll see you tonight at the award ceremony. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to host that. Great to have you here on Bloomberg West.